Hello and welcome to what I believe is the 27th episode of my mostly stock career. Now, lot of interesting stuff, sort of, to talk about. Now, if I remember correctly, uh, I ended on the Moho mission, which means that is going towards Moho. It should be getting there in like 50 or 60 days. Um, Probably from what I can predict, next thing that's going to happen is going to be Duna kind of showing up and actually being in the correct transfer window to bring our Duna mission back, since the transfer window for that is basically if Duna's to the right and Kerbin should be basically to the bottom of the sun, just kind of relative to each other, about 90 degrees, give or take a little bit. And then for Eve, the transfer window on that going to it would be if Kerbin's at the bottom, then Eve needs to be like in between where it is now and kind of where Kerbin is. So it has a little ways to go, probably another 80 to 100 days, maybe more. I'm not 100% certain on how long it'll take. I just know it's not quite ready. So what we're kind of looking at here is just me working on designing something that could potentially take off from Eve, since taking off from Eve is kind of complicated. Uh, it requires anywhere between, I want to say, 6 and 12,000 delta V. Probably a lot more than 6 being the bare minimum, since I don't think anything you can land on Eve reasonably would be able to do it in only 6,000 delta V. So probably between like 8 and 12 to 14 delta V, depending. It really depends on the thrust to weight ratio of the stages. So the longer you're sitting in Eve's atmosphere, the more difficult it's going to be. Versus whereas you have higher thrust to weight ratio, you get further away from Eve faster, so the atmosphere thins out and the gravity gets less intense. So it's kind of based off of that, the thrust to weight ratio. Now, what I started to think halfway through this was, instead of just using normal liquid fueled engines, I might have a lot more success using jet engines, because that way I can actually use their high efficiency and really high thrust to try and get myself off the surface of Eve, since Eve's atmosphere is quite intense. I want to say it starts at it starts really high up. I think it might be 200,000. Unless that's Joule. No, I think maybe 120. I'm not 100% certain, although if I was going to go to Eve, I'd probably look that up beforehand. But I haven't been in Kerbal Space Program for a while. Since last time I actually ran it was last time I recorded when we were doing the Moho thing, so I'm just kind of improvising with what I'm working on. The moment you've all been waiting for, not really. Let's see. For those who are curious, I should say, probably starts better. Basically, the reason that I have not been recording or really doing much aside from maybe answering a comment or two or replying to a comment or two is because it's nothing like going to a funeral that you don't want to have to go to kind of put you out of the mood of really having fun, enjoying something, or to completely take away any motivation you had to do anything. Yeah, I think I will leave it at that. I don't want to go into too many details, even though I could probably rant about this for half an hour at least. But I'm just going to leave it as it is. Basically, around the time I disappeared, I didn't decide. I attended a funeral I didn't really want to attend. I'm going to leave it at that. So back in the game, this kind of contraption, it does rather well. I'm not sure how it would fare on Eve with the higher gravity. The denser atmosphere might make it'd have more intake air, but it wouldn't have as much thrust-weight ratio as early, although it'd have the same fuel efficiency. So on Eve, it'd probably still work. It'd just maybe take longer to actually build up for the engines. But eventually, I think it would work. If it didn't, that center engine, I could actually fire to give it a little bit of a boost, since that one doesn't have anything under it. Although to transfer it to Eve, I'd probably have to put something under it. But I was just practicing the takeoff stage. Now, what I'm kind of waiting for here is I'm just time accelerating a bit of time, because I want to get a little more science, because at this point I get the idea, instead of using a rocket with jet engines, how about I just do something a little funner for Eve, since taking off from Eve is quite the challenge. We might come back to it before we consider this series fully ended. Uh, I'm not sure. I guess I just kind of want to visit all the planets. Actually say I've finished something, since the other career modes I've ever tried, I ended up just kind of stopping halfway through since they didn't go um, very much as planned, or not close enough to planned that I really kind of followed through with it. But I actually want to follow through with this and the RimWorld thing before I start something new. So we're gonna see these finish up hopefully pretty soon. Uh, Depending on when I get chances to record, etc. Other variables. Anyway, so like I said, when I saw all of those, what I did is I got the little bit of science from the Duna mission, there's the processing lab processing science, and I sent it back, and now it is being used to, well, it unlocked that probe, the Mark II probe, so I was able to kind of design this craft using that. And of course I put some science on it. We'll do a little bit of science when we fly around Eve. Stuck in a nice cargo bay, so it's aerodynamic. 2 turbojets should provide us enough thrust. Since it's a plane, it doesn't need a full 1.0 thrust to weight ratio to take off. It can take off at an angle and not need that full amount to actually fly. As for all spaceplanes, want to keep the lift behind the center of mass, and I just like to have kind of this intermediate wing stage, and then have both toward the front and the back some very strong control surfaces. In this case, it's the tail fins. I particularly like them because they're very large control surfaces, and I've just found them to be really nice. Now, I don't really like the small landing legs for anything bigger than like a very small plane, and this one's a little bit bigger because it's longer. So I try them out thinking I can get away with it. It ultimately doesn't pan out, so I end up switching them to the larger gear, which gives the plane a lot more clearance when it's trying to take off, since the previous problem was mostly destroying the engines on takeoff. Now, this plane actually has an amazing takeoff. It took off really early, only at like 50 meters per second it was actually starting to pull away from the runway, and because of that I decided to test out its maneuverability a little bit, and I have to say I am very happy with its ability to maneuver. So I'm thinking, I wonder what it might be able to do for, say, pulling out of a dive, just how quickly it could do it. So from 2,000 feet I decided to start pulling out of the dive at 800 meters, or I mean 2,000 meters, and I'm able to survive with about 200. So it takes about 600 meters to pull out of a dive, not going that fast, but it still has a lot of control. So I like it, at least as a preliminary design. I might change it up a little bit for Eve, or maybe not. Anyway, I'm saving it for now, and we'll get back to it when we're closer to Eve's actual encounter. So what we are looking at right now actually is just the Moho, because Moho is going to happen first, so I might as well take care of it while we're here before we have to take care of Duna and then Eve, probably in that order. Also, I do want to point out, suddenly my voice is louder. Well, it took me this long to figure out how to fix my mic not behaving the way I had it set up, since I ended up upgrading to Windows 10. And although some of the features are okay, some of them aren't, since a lot of stuff actually hasn't updated, like for some reason, the audio enhancements of the small amp that I use for my headset, the audio drivers on it conflict with a lot of games on Steam for some reason. Basically what happens is if I have the enhancements set up on the audio drivers, then when I talk, and by the way, this increased volume is one of the enhancements, since the microphone has a high ohm rate, it's kind of power hungry, so it needs the extra amp on it to allow me to actually speak with any loudness. So my voice before was basically my voice without the amp working. Anyway, I have to disable that if I'm trying to play anything on Steam, otherwise for some reason the entire PC's audio cuts out. That doesn't make much sense. And it's the enhancements of the actual headset that are doing it. Not the headset, but the amp doing it, which is what's really weird, because you'd think maybe only the amp would have the issue doing it, but it actually disables the sound for the whole PC. So if I send up sound mixers on something else through the actual speakers, not the amp, so the amp isn't even being used anymore, just the fact that it's plugged in messes with it. So that's very strange. Anyway, what has been going on is I was encountering a bug, just like in real life with this amp thing that I'm not too sure about. But what the bug is I can't turn the vessel. So what I mean by this is I'm trying to rotate this with the WASD keys, nothing's happening. I'm trying to change the acceleration. At some point, I'm going to start attempting to fire the engine to rotate it, and it's not going to work. So you can see I have the engine on, seeing if that will help me rotate. This craft isn't rotating at all. I thought it was because I didn't have any SAS, or that maybe it was just not working well. But if you actually look closely, you can see that the vessel, the orange tank, is tilting back and forth slightly. What that means is, for some reason, the head of the vessel is locked facing the way it's currently facing, and that's just some unexplained phenomenon. So here's a better example of what the actual problem is. So if you look, the orange tank is wobbling, and this craft is constantly forcing itself to still face one direction. It's not actually able to turn. I can't say why it happens, like I said. All I know is I end up doing I did a quick save earlier before I wasted all this fuel, and then I decided to reload it, and that managed to actually fix the problem. So, pretty easy solution, just reloading the scene, although it's still strange that it happened, probably because I haven't loaded up Kerbal Space Program in over a month. Let's go back to the quick save, see what happens. Sometimes, I guess, quick saving, quick loading fixes weird things. Oh, would you look at that? Suddenly I have a lot of control. A heck of a lot of control. I was not expecting to get this much from just doing that. Oh well, weird bug countered by reloading the scene. How fancy. Yeah, anyway, what I think is going to happen is, if I remember correctly, and I'm probably really wrong, the probe doesn't matter too much anyway, so I'm just going to say the probe is about 2000 delta V in it. Which means after I've expended about, I want to say 1200, I'm going to drop the probe. That's going to boost how much I have in this current stage by a little bit, probably up to 2600. And then what I'm going to do is use the probe to finish its own fuel to finish the maneuver. I actually could have checked the probe when I just detached it. And then I'm going to finish getting this thing into an orbit without using too much of the landing stage. So I remember from the other attempt, it's going to take like 10 minutes to slow this thing down. So when we get to about 6-7 minutes, I'm actually going to start firing the engine, because I'm going to need the extra time for the probe and everything. Not so much need the extra time for the probe itself, but to like detach it and everything. As well as it'll get more speed once we have less mass, I think, or more acceleration. I should say. So 7, 6, and we'll begin slowing down to get ready to get caught by Moho. And there we go. Let's use the computer, because the computer is really good at pointing at the maneuver node, and just start burning. Of course, high efficiency engine leads to, well, we get pretty good ISP, which means good fuel to amount of fuel for the amount of delta V we get, but it's gonna take some time, like 10 minutes, and I don't really think I'm gonna sit here for 10 minutes and burn. Well, I am, but you know, you guys don't have to, because I have fancy talents like video editing. And also I can time accelerate some, as long as it doesn't get too hectic or compress this craft too much. Anyway, I'll be back when this gets closer to detaching the probe. Alright, so we're just under 2000 delta V left, and it's time to drop the probe. So let's see, probe needs to decouple, and then I actually need to switch to it really fast, and I can't stage with it. Okay, so I have to activate the engines on their own. Okay, so this will just take a second, activate both of them, and then fire. How much did this have? It had, oh, only 1100, not 2000. Anyway, let's skew it a little bit so that our other craft doesn't hit it when we start finishing the node. And off it goes, and this one should be able to keep going and it won't hit it. Nope. So that's good. We'll just kind of fly by it. Now that probe is unfortunately not going to get caught in Moho because it doesn't have enough delta V, since we still need a few thousand more. This node is actually wrong at this point, because it reset to the full 3000, which means I should probably open up this and add another 1000 onto it. You know, this node probably isn't much use to me anymore. I'm just gonna burn retrograde, which is the direction of the target marker, and I'm just gonna do that until I'm captured. Since I can't really do anything else about that, since the maneuver node did change when I swapped vehicles, or swapped vessels. It just reset to the full 3000 distance that it has, instead of the 2000 remainder on the node. Which means, since our orbit was 3600, we needed to burn 300. I'm just going to assume about 600 is the orbit we need to be at. So we've still got another 1300 delta V left to go, and we will be having to stage pretty soon, since we've only got, what, another 500 left in this stage? Yeah, that did go up quite a bit though when we dropped the probe. So 500, it'll take about 600 out of the next stage. Still should be plenty to do landing and return, hopefully. If not, it doesn't matter too much. We've only condemned one Kerbal. Which Kerbal is that anyway? Barney Kerman. Okay, so hopefully we don't condemn him to the hot rock near the sun. But fortunately, Kerbals don't need any sustenance to survive. At least not yet. There are plenty of mods that add that, like TAC life support. Rover Dude has some more basic, less cruel life support mod, where the Kerbals just kind of go on strike if they don't get snacks. And they never die, they just stop working, stop being able to be used when they're on strike. They act kind of like tourists. And then when you feed them, they start working again, so they're very nice about that. And now we have the nuclear engine, which is supposed to be very much high efficiency. It also generates a lot of heat, if I remember correctly, so hopefully nothing explodes. but it does not use too much liquid fuel. Yeah, we're not using hardly any. Although it's also got a really low thrust to weight ratio. So even though we've got 7,000 meters per second of delta V, 21 minutes of burn time, we've only got, what, 60 kilonewtons of thrust? Oh well. I think we're gonna get captured soonish. Since of course the capture always goes really quick from not being captured to being captured, and then it takes a long time to actually get down to the orbit we want to get down to. But at least we got one thing in orbit around Moho. I wonder what that probe's gonna do. It might fly out and hit something. That'd be interesting if it did happen. As for Eve and Duna, I think next time we're gonna have to end up starting with Duna, send our main vessel back on its way home with the rest of the science to unlock all of the tech that's remaining, and then send that plane out to Eve however we might do that. Probably just gonna tape it onto a rocket, and yes, tape it onto a rocket with lots of struts, and then just launch it towards Eve and then have that thing enter the atmosphere. I think the plane might be able to enter the atmosphere by itself. Maybe. I'm not sure how it'd be affected by heating. If it entered too quickly, Eve would absolutely destroy it, since Eve has, I think, 5 times the atmospheric pressure of Kerbal. So maybe we might have to put it on a fairing and put a heat shield under it to slow it down enough so that it can survive. But this burn is indeed happening, and we're almost done actually. Let's see, our periapsis is going to be about 200,000. We're going to get captured any second now. There we go. Now we're officially captured on Moho, and we're just slowing down at this point to try and get a decently circular orbit for whenever we do our landing. Should we do the landing? Wondering when would be a great time for that. I want to land on the brighter side so that I have a constant supply of electric charge versus landing on the dark side. So my current position is really bad, since it kind of would force me to land on the dark side. Let's see. Periapsis is coming down. Still have 6k delta V. Now I do have to be very conscious about this because, well, my thrust to weight ratio is incredibly low, which means if I'm not careful, we'll repeat things that we repeated on Minmus a while ago. It's been so long I've nearly forgotten the names of some of these planets. Anyhow, there we go. We are caught on Moho. And actually, wow, those are really suffering a lot of heat, aren't they? We can take surface and some science. I'm wondering, what scans can we do twice? I know we can't do a seismometer scan up here, but we can say log pressure data. Then we can send it back, just like the temperature data. Send it back. I want to say that's all we can do for there. We can do a goo experiment. Now, of course, we're not getting very much value for these, but I never really intended to bring them back. Actually, I did kind of intend to bring them back. Anyway, these are high over Moho experiments. We're gonna take the ground experiments and the I'll actually reset that one because I do want to get some science, I guess. Maybe we'll see what happens. A little out of practice with this game, so take your EVA report, keep that, and board the craft again, and then say review stored data and send that away. So I guess I will keep the ground experiments, which is going to be mostly everything, and then I'll take a near experiment on one of the goo canisters. So we'll get some science and I guess bring it back. But we'll have to look into what's actually going to happen in the future, when I actually remember how to play this game properly. So until then, this was episode 27. Thanks for watching. This is PTT GRW, signing out.